Everybody, Luke McElroy from Mets Performance Consulting. Welcome back to another episode of the Physiology Secrets podcast. Joined today by Nick Jankowskis. Today we're going to talk about detraining effects. So we had a question come through. Look, long story short, the guy who sent the question through hasn't been able to train properly for 4 months. So we just want to talk about what happens to the body physiologically over the course of 2, 3 or 4 months of doing essentially no training or very, very little training, both from the aerobic system and also the anaerobic systems. So just quickly, Nick, I'll chuck to you. What are the main things that we're going to see from doing, basically being, let's say, peaked or close enough to reasonably fit to doing absolutely nothing due to whatever your circumstances are?
Yeah, it's a classic case of use it or lose it. So the main thing that was sort of explained in the question that came through was the instant notice that heart rate was significantly higher. Why is that a case? If the heart's not under any sort of, training stress, so it's not continually being worked, there's nothing going on there. The heart at the end of the day is a muscle, so if we've developed the size of the heart to be able to pump more blood out per beat, so our stroke volume, as soon as that heart starts to shrink because there's no training effect and the muscle is basically, it's like doing bicep curls. If you do heaps of bicep curls for a couple of months and you do nothing, your biceps slowly start to diminish. So a similar thing in the heart there, and the heart's just having to pump more frequently to get the same cardiac output, the same amount of blood pumped out per minute. So it's the instant one that a lot of athletes will notice is heart rate will go up quite quickly for the same effort or the same activity. As a result, usually things like rating perceived exertion goes up, so you might be running it at whatever pace you'd normally run your easy run at, and it's now significantly harder, mainly from a cardiovascular perspective. But then some of the other things that do happen as well is we start to lose a few things in and around the muscle in terms of using the oxygen, to keep it quite simple. So if we can't use as much oxygen in the muscle for that same activity, it's going to make it a bit harder, a bit more reliant on that anaerobic system. So things like our AVO2 difference start to decrease a bit. The muscle can't just extract that oxygen out of the blood as effectively anymore. Might also have some influence into what's happening in terms of getting the oxygen or extracting the oxygen out of the lungs into the bloodstream in the first place. A little bit of that pulmonary diffusion might diminish a little. It's really, everything starts to decline because, like I said before, it's use it or lose it. So we see all of our responses to activity start to drop down below those levels because you just haven't trained. That's the real simple thing to do. Yeah,
so I'm looking at a graph on my computer now, which if you're watching this, we'll put up a screenshot, and I'll also link the video that I'm referring to now. But it's a research study which is showing the percentage of change from detraining. So if somebody who's reasonably fit doing absolutely nothing, like what is going to change and how quickly. And the key takeaway is after 12 days of no training, our stroke volume decreases about 10%. So stroke volume is how much blood the heart is beating out per beat. So if that drops 10%, your heart lot. Your heart rate is going to go up to compensate. So your max heart rate, which is on this graph too, goes up about 5% within about 12 days. All right? So everyone talks about heart rate going up and down, but heart rate's only one half of the equation. As I said in quite a number of podcasts in the last couple of weeks, seems to be a common trend at the moment is talking about heart rate. Is that heart rate is irrelevant, really. It's cardiac output. Cardiac output is stroke volume, so how much blood per beat times by heart rate, which is beats per minute. So if your stroke volume comes down 10%, your heart rate's going to come up a bit to compensate it. But have a look, if your stroke volume goes down 10% and your heart rate only goes up 5%, do the math, your cardiac output is going to be decreased. You've got less blood. So what happens really instantly, within a couple of days, and obviously 10% in 12 days, is your heart's not going to shrink too much as a muscle just yet, but you're going to lose a lot of your blood plasma. So half of your blood is plasma and fluid and that sort of stuff, and you lose that quite quickly. In that plasma, you're going to have things like oxidative enzymes, all these things that are going to help to turn oxygen into usable energy. We're going to lose quite a lot of that quite quickly. Other things that change in 12 days, we've got, or it has it on here as well, cardiac output is down about 7%, all right, because stroke volume's down, heart rate's up. VO2 max is down about 6 or 7%, which makes sense because VO2 max is your cardiac output times by your AVO2 difference, which is the oxygen extraction part. Well, hey, even if your oxygen extraction is the same, which it's not, it's a little bit down, but even if your oxygen extraction is similar, if your cardiac output's down, you're going to have a lower VO2 max. It does take a little bit longer, according to this graph, for your AVO2 difference to change. We're talking more like sort of 4 weeks and beyond. But we definitely lose that cardiovascular stuff, the stroke volume and the heart rate quite quickly. So according to this, you'd expect to decline about 6 or 7% within about 2 weeks. It's not a lot, and that's doing absolutely no training. We know that in the maintenance phase, if you can just do 2 reasonably high intensity sessions a week, that's going to maintain all these things. So it is important, unless you've got a medical reason or a significant injury or whatever it is that you can't do any training. When we talk about off-season stuff, it is important just twice a week, Monday, Thursday, something like that, just to get out for a 20-minute hard, high-intensity effort to maintain these things. But if you do have to completely stop due to illness or injury or whatever it is, we're going to lose a fair bit, 6-7% of your VO2 max in 12 days. It gets slower but still does decline. 56 days here, we're looking at about a 13% decrease in VO2 max, that's quite a lot. 84 days, which is almost 3 months, we're looking at about an 18 or 19%. So that you can pretty much assume you're back to baseline, given there's about a 20% scope, give or take, for most people. So it is definitely a case of use it or lose it. The reason this athlete has 10 beats higher heart rate is because their stroke volume is significantly lower, which means your cardiac output is going to be lower as well. So that's the aerobic side. It is a bit of doom and gloom. You lose, when you're fit, you lose about 4 weeks of, there's another slide on this video, which again we'll link it, about 4 weeks of mitochondrial adaptation, which is what we're aiming for. We lose that in about 1 week of no activity. So 4 weeks to get it, 1 week to lose it. So that's where periodisation of training is really important, to get the timing right, because these things are so dynamic. They change very, very quickly. You get injured for 2 weeks and you're not back to square one, but 10% stroke volume, 7% VO2 max is a significant change. So you've got to be really careful with your periodisation. On the anaerobic side, you want to talk about the differences in how quickly you might lose your aerobic versus your anaerobic adaptations.
Yeah, anaerobic's probably a little bit better in terms of, like, at the end of the day, it's just, you're not using oxygen, so we're taking out all this equation of like what the heart's doing, essentially what the muscle extracting in terms of oxygen. All these factors that have taken a long time to develop and build. And I guess a bit of a case study for how well you can sort of maintain, I guess, a bit of that anaerobic is when you did 2,000 watts and left it for a couple of months, came back and actually improved wattage after a bit of recovery time. So you're not going to lose as much or as quickly. You're probably going to lose a bit. Like if you're doing completely nothing, regardless if you're going aerobic or anaerobic in terms of your events and things like that, you're going to decline in performance if you just do 0 for a period of time. But definitely, I guess, maybe talk to that 2,000 watt example of, you went away, did a whole bunch of work in the gym, did a whole bunch of sort of sprint anaerobic type training to get the 2,000 watts, left it for 2 months, thereabouts? Probably more. Didn't do a lot and came back and had a pretty sort of similar output, just from the fact that the body didn't necessarily, I guess, lose anything. There's no pathway we're trying to maintain there. The oxygen consumption isn't really doing anything for us. It's just you developed a bunch of muscle size and we're able to keep a reasonable amount of that. And then it was just the nervous system was doing a lot from a sprint perspective, because we were just producing energy internally. Maybe it would have been a factor if we looked at your 30-second sprint. Might have been a bit different in terms of tolerating some of that more extended fatigue.
Which you could argue is getting into that aerobic
starting
side
to
as well,
become more aerobic the more aerobic you are, the better you can do those longer efforts. But yeah, for the really short stuff, like if you're a 50-metre sprinter or a 100-metre sprinter, it's got Harley just kicking in on the side.
Go away, Harley.
But yeah, for that really short stuff, it doesn't really do a hell of a lot. Like, it's not really going to decline a massive amount over that time.
And I think that's the key, that the oxygen kinetic changes versus the anaerobic. Whenever you're talking about oxygen, if you ever use oxygen, that stuff is going to change very, very quickly, whereas when you don't have to use oxygen, it doesn't change as quickly. So I think it's close to like 2 or 3 months compared to like 2 weeks for your anaerobic. And I guess a good example is when I did do the 2,000 watts, I started at 1,230 as my peak, got to 1,941 in that 3 month block. Even now, I wouldn't say I do any anaerobic training. I just go out and do my general day-to-day stuff. I still use my legs, but I'm not going to the gym and doing heavy stuff. I'll still hit about mid-1700s. So I'm not hitting 1900, 2000, but I'm definitely not back to 1200, even though I'm not focusing on anaerobic. And that's, as you said, a lot of it is the neuromuscular stuff. My brain still knows how to switch on the muscles.
Yeah, you're better coordinated.
I still have a lot of the muscle mass. I've definitely lost a little bit, and that's probably why I'm at 1700 and not 1900. But it is a slower change when you talk about those anaerobic adaptations. You don't have to worry about oxidative enzymes. It's really just brain turns on fast twitch fibre, contracts maximally. It's reasonably...
It's more of a simple process as well.
Different when you talk about fuel stores and that sort of stuff. Because if you reduce your muscle mass a little bit, that's going to change your 10-second sprint time, but talking about maximal force output, there's not too much change. So I guess in summary of what we're talking about there, the aerobic adaptations, you're going to lose it quite quickly. So if you can, unless you're really sick or ill or whatever, or injured, sorry, try to do even one time a week, but 2 times a week ideally of high intensity, just 20 minutes even, to maintain a lot of those aerobic adaptations, because 4 weeks on, you lose it in about a week. Versus the anaerobic stuff, don't get too stressed about it, because that takes a fair while for you to get a reversal in that. That being said, if you do absolutely nothing, the example I'll give is Eliza, who did her ACL in footy a year ago. She lost, because she was on crutches for 2 months, so literally one leg did absolutely nothing. We went to a new physio recently, who's like Mick Hughes. I don't know if you know Mick Hughes.
ACL guru.
ACL guru, exactly, because we were sick of what we're getting. So she did, even a year post-op, almost a year post-op, we did a right quad versus a left quad effort using a force dynamometer. 118 kilos on the left, 37 on the right. Like that's a lot. Ridiculous discrepancy in quad strength, and that's the difference between me just being able to go out for a walk and a run and a jog, even though it's not maximal effort, versus doing absolutely nothing is significant. Now that's a prolonged period, but she would have been even weaker after 3 months post injury, because you could just see the muscle size just shrink. Not only just the muscle size, but also her quad shakes, because the brain doesn't know how to
maintaining that neuromuscular connection.
It doesn't know how to apply it. Last thing we might touch on is in terms of use it or lose it for the aerobic. It's not all doom and gloom. All the research shows that you keep your capillarization. So you keep a lot of your structures in place. So your capillarization is basically the blood supply to the muscle. So your blood supply to the muscle maintained. You're just not getting as much blood around, and even the mitochondrial stuff, the increased number, size, and surface of mitochondria, you're still going to have them there. They don't have as much oxidative capacity and all the enzymes associated with it. So it's not like you go do some aerobic training, you build that base, and then you go completely back to baseline. You still have the capillaries. You still have you still got the internal structures that take in and transport and consume oxygen. You just don't have the blood supply and the enzymes associated with that. So although you do lose your VO2 max quite quickly, it's almost like you have an absolute baseline where you've got not much structures to do it. You go do your training and you increase your structures. Yes, your VO2 and your oxidative enzymes come down, but you've got a better base next time to then build on again and again. So it is certainly important to have a physiological rest and all that. If you've got unlimited time to get back to peak fitness, you can go and do absolutely nothing, but if you take 4 weeks off doing nothing, it's going to probably take you 16 to 20 weeks to feel anything, to feel good again. So in summary today, aerobic versus anaerobic detraining. Within about 12 days aerobically, you're going to start to lose 7 to 10% of the things. After 3 months, it's closer to 20%. You can maintain that through sort of 2 times a week of high intensity activity. The anaerobic side, you will lose it, but not as quickly. Because it's, instead of using oxygen, it's talking about muscle fibre size and the neuromuscular communication between the brain and the muscles as well. So, anything to add?
No, I think just highlighting the importance of that, the couple of high intensity sessions in a week. There's a lot of athletes who may not be doing nothing at the moment, but I know a lot have been asking about, I'm just going to go away and just do some long sum, build lots of base and lots of volume, which is okay for a period, but just keep in mind that you're still going to go through this detraining effect if you just completely wipe out the high intensity. It's the same when you go into a taper. It's why we maintain intensity and drop the volume. So just highlighting that point from before for anyone who isn't necessarily going away and doing nothing. If you're going away and doing something, try to keep a little bit of that high intensity in, because that's going to minimise some of this effect as well. Even though you're still training, it's that component of not having that high intensity that's still going to cause a bit of this decline anyway. Regardless of how much volume you go and do, you could still be doing 20 hours a week, but if you're not doing any of that upper intensity stuff, your top end will drop real quick.
And maybe a discussion for a future podcast, but the research sort of shows that just doing your continuous sub-max intensity stuff, your VO2 max plateau is about 60, which is good for most people. But
it's only help you improve up to about 60. But anything beyond that, you need something higher.
You need a higher intensity stimulus. So 60 for a lot of people is fantastic. Don't get me wrong, but it's not. You're not going to win. Most age categories you're not going to win at 60. You're going to need. At least 65. Even if you're a 60-year-old, you're going to need 65 VO2, and then above.
Younger categories are going to be 70 plus.
70 plus, exactly right. So intensity is super important to have in there. Maybe we'll cover that in a future podcast. That'll do for today. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll speak to you on the next episode.